Hi, everyone. My name is Yehuda Halevi. Welcome back to another episode of Shells and Shadows. Today, I have a guest with me, Stephen Brandwayn. Stephen, how are you today?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. So, for those who may not know, give us a little overview. Who is Stephen Brandwayn?
Wow, such a broad question.
It is.
Uh, I am me. I born and raised in Bogota, Colombia. College in the U.S. Lived and worked in New York for a bit. Traveled the world. Lived in Europe. Went back to Colombia. Married. Three daughters. And after 20 years of being back in Colombia, I moved to Denver July 2023. In that parallel, I have been an entrepreneur. I've had businesses in clothing, and my last business was an Uber for trucks, technology and logistics. I worked for many years in logistics, and when I moved to the US, to Denver, I decided I was going to dive into my coaching practice. I have my life coaching, my executive coaching, positive intelligence coaching, and others. And what I enjoy most is connecting with people and just helping people be the best version of themselves. And that's what I've been enjoying in my practice, just putting my service out there to whoever might need a push in their mental health or their current struggles or getting unstuck. That's an overview.
That's a pretty big calling, too. How did you go from more of the business side of entrepreneurship, working with Uber for trucks, to now working with people and self development and that whole world, which is very different from what you started out doing?
When pandemic hit, I was like 5 years into my startup, and I realized, I went from like extreme growth mode into survival mode, just because of the whole economy situation. And as I was going through that process, I just did a lot of introspection and self work, self development, which we'll dive into, I think, probably in this session. And doing that process, I'm like, you know what? I really enjoy what I do, but it's not my calling. And just questioning, okay, then what would be that calling? Uh, and I just came to terms with my connection. What I've always enjoyed best in all of my endeavors has been raising my team to a higher level because I never just saw, you know, Joe, the accountant. To me, Joe was a human being, above
Sure.
all, a
Yeah.
complex human being. And if I connected with him at his personal human level, then I would help him be the best version of himself. And therefore, as default, have him be a great accountant for the team. But that to me came supernatural. And after many years of leading many teams and my companies, I realized, wow, my style of leadership is different in that empathetic leadership. I actually do listen, genuinely listen, actively listen, and connect with people. And that to me comes naturally. So I'm like, you know what? That's what I enjoy most. And I think that's probably something that I do best. So let's put that out there, especially in a world where mental health is a crisis now and it's a challenge. And so many people just don't have the tools or the understanding of how they can maybe get unstuck, whatever stuck means to them. So this is just me putting myself out there too, giving a hand, serving.
That whole culture around mental health, where today it's becoming very destigmatized and we're able to talk about it, especially in men, which we haven't always been able to do. Does that differ, in your opinion, from Colombia versus the US on how people address that?
Ah, probably yes, but ultimately no. So off the top, yes, Colombia, being Latino, is very machista. I don't know if you're familiar with the word, very male dominant. Um, and that just makes it harder for males to be vulnerable. There is much more of a boxing in of the role of the male, and you have to be tough and you have to be strong and being vulnerable or talking about your darkness is not really a thing. That in goes hand in hand with also the level of education, where I think the more educated the people are, the more exposed they have been to understanding that being vulnerable is part of the human condition. It's not a gender thing, it's not a role thing, it's just part of our human experience. Ultimately, it's 8 billion people in the world, and we're all here doing the best we can and just being a little bit more understanding and more accepting of each other in that sense. Now, the US being a first world country versus Colombia being a third world country has much more of that exposure. Yet, you also see a lot of the defined roles and boxing in as well. But I think it's more accepted, as you were saying, it's in today's maybe environment in the US.
And I think being in a first world country also does pose its own limitations
Of
to
course.
addressing this because there's more to hide behind. There's more to distract ourselves with. Um, we're grateful enough to live in a very comfortable society, but that brings its own challenges for especially people who are struggling, where it's easy to numb and distract and hide. Do you see that
Absolutely.
in your practice?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I guess the distractions are different. The numbing is ultimately for the same objective, but we use different channels or different methods to just numb ourselves. But yeah, I guess the word that you use I like is the distractions. I think the most valuable resource we as humans have is our energy. And the most valuable resource that we have that the world wants is our attention. So there's a saying where energy goes, attention flows, right? Or kind of like that. So, um, so many attention grabbing situations. I mean, the smartphone itself is just an attention seeker. Your relationships. Um, so if you're not conscious and focused as far as where you place that attention, you will be distracted, be it with first world situations or third world situations. But ultimately, it's a distraction.
This brings up a thought for me. So, something I'm sensing is kind of an underlying theme of what we're talking about here is that w- when we view ourselves as separate from our environment and separate from everything around us, we can kind of get the idea that, well, I myself and whatever I do and wherever I place my attention, I'll be drawn towards. But there's so many things around us that we're so interconnected with, and if we don't place our attention consciously, we can get pulled in so many directions. Again, technology today is very much an attention grabber without us even realizing. The people around us very much influence us more than we think. So I know in your coaching practice, you work a lot with psychedelics. Um, how have psychedelics come into your practice, into your life, and what have they taught you about yourself and the world? It's a big
Um,
question.
it's a huge question. It's a beautiful question. I think it's a matter of having tools, right? You can reach the same goal if you're a great meditator. Meditation, breath work, nature walks, just raising and elevating that state of consciousness. Now we have psychedelics, which are, I think, an express way. It's like the express road to that uh, place of detachment and perspective. Ultimately, it's detachment and perspective that allows us to understand anything from a different lens. Um, that said, they have to be done responsibly, right? So, psychedelic realm has many different. Some of them are, natural plant medicines like psilocybin, right, and peyote, ayahuasca, even cannabis, if used like in a therapeutical environment, can be used, to reveal. A psychedelic is the revealing of the psyche, pretty much. So as we age, when we go through our different stages of kids and teenagers, and then we start growing into adulthood, we understand and we learn. So our knowledge and our wisdom starts to become part of our day to day. I mean, this is part of the human experience. Who we are now, who we have become, is everything that has happened since, you were conceived until today, and maybe even you're carrying generational energies from even before. Um, but as time goes by, if there was trauma or if there was hardships and you didn't deal with them, then that starts to become an issue in life. And when you have unresolved issues, that's when you go to numb yourself. And that's where you use unconsciously or consciously. Um, but if you're willing to do the work, if you're serious about change, if you're serious about showing up to the best version of yourself, then there are tools out there that can help you explore, grow, detach, let go, embrace whatever it is that is, your current moment. So for me personally, psychedelics, they just became such an important tool in my personal growth development process. Um, I never really had the need to take pharmaceutical medication. I have nothing against it. I think it also has a place where it works and it's great, but I don't think it's a one size fits all solution. And that's kind of where I start to differ. Where anyone who comes to the doctor is like, "Oh, I'm sad. Here, take antidepressants." Maybe this person doesn't really need them, just because they're going through a tough time. I think the antidepressants are great for if you have like some chronic depression or a really hard time. And I also think that ideally they shouldn't be taken forever. Should be taken for a moment while you kind of step out of whatever that.
And that's become the standard these days in many
Yes,
cases.
yes.
Yeah.
At least in my circle, and most people I know that do take them, they can't get off the wagon. It's kind of they're on there, and they just become more they create some resistance, so they just have to even take more all the time. And
Yeah.
and when they're trying to wean off of them, it becomes this huge challenge, and it's like they become afraid. Like if they don't take them, they actually feel that emptiness or void coming on. Whereas psychedelics, on the other hand, there's so many studies and clinical trials that have shown, like just maybe with a one-time session, shown amazing improvement and benefits for different states of mental health or trauma or recovery or healing that people may look for. And as far as psychedelics, there's from microdosing, which is a very, very small amount of psychedelics that you actually don't even feel the psychedelic effect. It's just sub-perceptual, but it's a 3-month program that actually does have amazing benefits. And then there are the different ceremonies or journeys that they're called that have a stronger therapeutic impact with some intention setting and obviously the right preparation to the journey prior to, and then the great work that should be done after the journey, from the journey. And that's super important.
I think there's also something to be said about the fact that this is something that comes from nature, something that grows from the ground, and overlooked up until recent years when it's become more prevalent and more widespread and available. But something about connecting to yourself using a tool that's grown from the ground from nature, to me, just resonates and feels, I guess, there's something beneficial to it because of where it's from. A friend of mine said to me that it's the difference between taking the stairs and taking the elevator in meditative practice over many years versus like a psychedelic journey. And for each person, one might be a better solution than the other. It really depends, I think, on who you are. How do you think the whole idea of nature and connecting to nature plays into the experience of this tool?
I'm a huge fan of nature. I think it's absolutely breathtaking. I think nature and every moment of life is just a miracle, and just the fact that creation has allowed for this situation to happen, and that, right, the ground is giving us these plants, these mushrooms, as tools to be, used for our personal growth. There's two parts of us, well, several parts of us, but there's the ego self, which is based on the predictable, the safety. So the ego likes to be safe, it likes to enjoy the predictability, and keeps us in a safe place. But then there's our divine part, our soul, our mystical part, our spiritual part, our that's based on uncertainty. And when we go into the uncertain, it's uncomfortable. But using these natural medicines that nature allows us to have um, is just beautiful, and if done in a responsible environment and guidance, they often and most times open these doors into letting go or clarifying or understanding or just getting a different perspective on something that you've been struggling on, and they do just connect with with everything, with the source and nature. I mean, there's a question. This doctor, a British doctor, Carhart Harris, he posed a question once that had really resonated with me. He's like, one question would be, we have so many systems in our body, right? And so many nerve receptors, and there's, you know, all of these molecules and cells that are functioning at the same time. And we have one, which is a serotonin um, H2A receptor, something like that. And the fact that we have that receptor is that is which we can actually have a psychedelic experience. So why did God or our creator create us with that receptor? That when we actually use psychedelics, we can have a psychedelic experience. Because if you use a blocker for that receptor and then take a bunch of psychedelics, you won't feel anything. So God created us with that receptor. And I don't think it was an act of chance.
Probably not an act of chance. I think there is something profound about what nature can do to the mind and to the body, even without psychedelics. I think back to the last week, 2 weeks prior, it was snowing and it was cold, and I spent most of my time inside, and I started to feel just kind of like a dullness coming over me, like a grayish kind of mood. Um, and then all of a sudden, it was warm weather, and I decided I'm going to spend as many days outside in the mountains as possible, just being outside. And so, like last week, I went on 3 or 4 different hikes, and I didn't change anything else about my lifestyle, nothing. And it had profound effects on my perception of myself, of others around me, and my relationships, my connection with God, with nature, with the universe. And I just thought to myself, there's something that we miss in life when we put ourselves only in the concrete houses that we live in and in the buildings that we spend a lot of our day in. We forget, we almost get trapped into this grid, and we remember sometimes when it's nice weather out, oh, I need to get back out there. I need to reconnect with where I'm from, because that's all we're made out of the same materials as the trees and the ground and the earth in which we walk. It's a friendly reminder, like, hey, remember where you're from.
It's super powerful, absolutely. The elements, water, air, earth, and fire. That's what we're made of. And nature heals. And when we go out for a walk to nature, instantly, it instantly brings us back to center. Just being exposed. And if you could go just barefoot, put your bare feet on the ground or going to the beach and just sitting down on the sand, we are, electromagnetic beings as well. And we're charged. So are the ions that we have on our bodies, the extra ions or the less ions, whatever it is, however charged we are, the instant you put your bare feet on the ground or on the sand, you immediately channel and ground. Immediately, you're grounded. It's instant. And if you go for a walk in nature barefoot, or if you hug a tree, yeah, a tree hugger, whatever it is, and you put your forehead, not just your hands, but your forehead to the trunk, you're grounded and you're connected to the source. Instant.
To anyone listening and thinking that this is woo woo and out there, don't knock it till you try it, because I've also experienced that just taking my shoes off and putting them in the dirt, as hippie and out there as that is, it's real. I mean, you can feel it. You can really feel it.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can't deny it.
Yeah. So in your coaching practice, do you directly administer these psychedelic journeys, or how does that relate to your coaching practice as a whole?
I provide the coaching
Okay.
around it for the microdosing. I facilitate, I teach my clients. I explain to them what that looks like. If they are in Colorado, I gift them because I can't sell it, it's illegal, but I give it to them for free if they're curious about it. For all my clients outside of Colorado, I mean, there's a huge market out there, and most of the time they can find a way to get them. And in Colorado, I also guide with just psilocybin. So again, I do the coaching and I do the guidance. I do one-on-ones and I do groups as well, but only in Colorado. I'm not yet a licensed psilocybin therapist, but that is a certification that is just came out in Colorado on August 1st with the new Proposition 122 law. Um, but I've been doing this for years already before. So I'm gonna get my license as far as, to get the full certification. But many times my clients have their own medicine or have done the journey already, and they come to me, for guidance on the integration. I'm also an integration coach, and I help many of my clients integrating their experiences
Which is
or
incredibly important,
it's
not
the
just the
most
experience.
important.
Yeah.
I have a three-part program which I was telling you. So it's the journey to the journey, which is all the preparation prior to the journey, then the journey itself, and then the journey from the journey. So some of my clients are interested in different medicines, not just psilocybin. So they do that with a different guide, but many of them work with me on the prior, on the intention setting, on the preparation, because you want to get to the journey as light as possible. What does that mean? You have to be conscious of your sleep. You have to be conscious of your food, and there's so much toxicity in today's world. A lot of comes from the relationships. Sometimes our closest relationships might be the most toxic relationships in our lives, and we have to question that and kind of take a step back and understand. Okay, are these relationships in my life helping me grow, helping me be my best self, or are they super judgmental and maybe even very toxic and they're just draining me of my energy, right? You want to surround yourself by positive relationships in your life. And it's not just relationships, it could be at home, it could be at work, it could be at school, whatever that is. And also become conscious also of the content that you're consuming, the digital content, the shows you're watching, the podcasts you're listening to. A lot of toxicity out there, the media you consume, right? So you have to kind of become more conscious of how toxic is your life and who you're relating to or what you're relating with. So when you start to prepare for that journey, you're like, okay, and you start to become more aware. It's like, okay, the food you eat, are you taking care of, what you're putting into your mouth? Because most of the time we don't care. We just eat anything, a lot of alcohol, substances, and that takes a toll. So when we're doing a journey, make sure you want to get there and really take the best out of that experience. And there's a lot of intention setting. Then the journey itself, of course, and you have to just surrender when you go into the journey and let the medicine just show you whatever it's going to show you. Because if you're too focused on an intention, then you might be blinded and not see maybe other wisdom that's coming to you from the journey. So you just surrender and just allow for the experience to be unfold as it has to. And then as you come down from that experience, you have the decompression, and that's where the journey from the journey begins. The next day, which is the afterglow, where you still have a lot of that medicine in your system, and that's where you start to bring together your intentions and the wisdom and the insights and the highlights that you bring together, because you don't want to have that experience just be a moment in time. You want to say like, okay, what can I bring out of that experience to really help me make my day to day a better day today, to raise the better to a better version of me. And that's where the whole integration part comes in, and that's the most important part of the experience, the integration.
One thing that kind of is like an alarm in my mind, coming back to the title of this podcast, Shells and Shadows. We spend a lot of time pushing away our shadows, a lot of our energy avoiding fear. And so when we come into a state where everything is kind of just unleashed in our minds, and we have to then go and surrender to whatever comes up, what is the biggest challenge that you see when clients are in that experience? Do they resist surrendering to the experience? Does their ego get in the way? And how do they go through that without that immense fear that they've been avoiding?
Yes, and yes, and yes, of course. There is a lot of fear, there is a lot of resistance, and that's why the preparation is so important.
Got it.
I don't think there's such a thing as like a bad trip. It's like got this bad connotation. There's challenging moments during the journey, for sure. But those challenging moments, if you embrace them and you just kind of allow them and just sit with them, be like, all right, here we are. I'm not gonna move. I'm not gonna run. What is it about this feeling, this emotion, this thought that makes me want to run from this? Just sit with it. Look at it, just embrace it and be like, all right, what is it about you that I'm so afraid of? And it might be your ego, it might be a childhood experience, it might be a relationship with your father, your mother, you know, something that happened along the way that you just decided kind of to push aside, and it's coming to the surface. Of course, it's going to be a moment of anxiety and stress, and that's where the guidance comes in. During the journeys when I guide, I stay most of the time just kind of distant. It's just the moments that I might be struggling. Be like, all right, just sit with it. Just look at it in the eye and be like, all right, here we are. So now what? And the beauty of it is like you realize most of the time it's like, oh, it was actually not that scary. It was actually not that bad. It became super scary and super bad because you never dealt with it. So just putting it aside and pretending it wasn't there, and just for years and years or whatever it was, just not dealing with it, just you know became so big in your head that you thought it was like this massive, dark monster in your life. But then when you sat with it, you're like, oh wait, it wasn't that bad.
There's nothing to fear but fear itself.
That's the biggest fear of all, fear itself, exactly. And not dealing with something, just pretending it's not there and just avoiding it. Yeah, it worked for and it works for many people. And many people go through life just, let's not uncover that. Just leave it there. And that's a way. There's not a right way. But if you really want to live a free life, if you want to, be okay with it, and be okay with who you are, just not carrying. We carry these huge bags of heavy rocks and weights on our shoulders. And when you have one of these experiences and you're like, all right, I'm done with this huge duffel bag of rocks, and you just kind of drop a few duffel bags of rocks, well, you come out feeling super light. You're like, wow, it feels light. It feels refreshed. Absolutely. But there's a lot of internal work. And I think that we talked about this when we first met. Um, the external self and the internal self, right? Um, in my personal experience, when pandemic came and I dove within, that was what I realized. I'm like, wow, I've worked on my external self for over 40 years, and I've got my external self perfect. Perfect. I have the life. Externally, everything is great. My wife, my daughters, my work, my board meetings, an overachiever, many friends, and I would go and I would have a million meetings and it would be nonstop, and everything on the outside seemed perfect. But on the inside, my internal self had been ignoring me for I don't know how many years. And I wasn't even aware of it. I wasn't even conscious that that was happening.
And that's the craziest part is that we can go so long without realizing that.
It was so hard, Yehuda. It was so hard to realize how long I had been going on. And I didn't even know that I had been just so disconnected. And that was kind of my turning point. I was around what, 42, 43 maybe. And I was just sitting down in my house and I was like just thinking about myself. And I realized that there was something off. There was something inside that was off. Um, but I had never been able to put my finger on it because when I tried, 5 minutes into it, I'm like, this is gonna need more than 5 minutes, and I don't have 5 minutes because I'm a super busy guy, whatever.
Yeah.
So when I finally pandemic, it was like the biggest gift for me. Here you go. You needed some time to do this, and I dove within, and I started writing, journaling. I had never done that, but it just came out naturally. I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and like a few weeks in, I'm like, I put my finger on it. I knew what was wrong. What was wrong was my disconnect. There was a light way down there inside of me. That was my true self. Saying, hey, remember me? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I remember you. He's like, okay, well, I'm not going to stop nagging you. Pay attention to me. And what I realized is that externally, who I was, and internally, who I forgot I was so disconnected, so incoherent, so dishonest. That was what was kind of feeling off. I'm like, all right, well, let's do something about it. Now that I know what the problem is, I can do something about it.
Exactly.
So let's work on that. And I'm like, how do I connect with that inner light, or how do I, bring this gap back to nothing? And hopefully, ideally, who I am on the inside is, a mirror of who I am on the outside, because we are ego self and divine self. This is our human condition, and ego is not a bad thing. Ego is part of our human
Keeps us
condition.
alive.
Right.
It
It
keeps
keeps us
us
alive. It
in
gives
this
us
world.
opportunity to grow. It gives us struggles and challenges. And thanks to struggles and challenges, we grow. Right. And it's a beautiful learning part of us. But I had given my ego self full, you know, pilot instructions for years. And that's not a good thing. That's not sustainable. So when I started to bring that into balance and just peeling layers and layers and layers and layers off, I started to see that light way down there. It started to, come back to the surface. It became brighter and brighter. I'm like, okay. So a lot of that work happened prior to doing any psychedelics. So I think diving into psychedelics, yeah, I mean, it's an option, but I think that's not shouldn't be your first go-to. Your first go-to is doing your personal work and getting in touch with yourself and really kind of understanding and asking yourself the hard questions. Do I know who I am? Do I know what I like? Do I know what am I clear on my priorities? Have I worked on my internal self? How is that balance between my internal self and my external self happening? And then as you do some of that work, then you have tools. You're like, okay, you can go to a talk therapist.
Sure.
You can go into meditation. You can go into breath work. You can go into exercise. And then you can explore psychedelics when you're kind of, more in tune with that balance.
Man, what you said about peeling back the layers, getting to that inner light, it's exactly why I started this podcast. I mean, there's guys my age who are wanting to do that kind of work now because you said, what, at 42, you had this moment of realization between your external self and your internal self, and the little guy that was like, "Hey, I'm in here. Remember me." And that's exactly why I wanted to do this. And so, how would you, I guess, direct someone who's in my position, early 20s? finishing college, trying to find their position in the world, how do you help them hold on to their internal self while they're trying to build externally? Because this is a place and a time, mid late 20s, 30s, 40s, when as men especially we're taught to build something and to provide, and it's very externally focused. So how do we hold on to that in that whole process?
I love it. And I wish somebody would have told me a lot of this, or there was more of this content that you're bringing to the table back in my time when I was in my 20s. But I think before, like me, I'm whatever, 70, 80 trillion cells, and I'm unique. Never before Stephen Brandwayn has there ever been this makeup of DNA and this human experience. And most likely after I leave this world, never again will this happen. So I am unique, I am authentic, and I'm big on sacred authenticity. And it's just amazing that 120 billion people have existed, and they have all have had a unique, fingerprint. We are all authentic and different. And that little seed that makes me special, authentic, and unique is mine. So it's entertaining what that seed vibrates to, what that's the frequency of that seed. And it's hard to put your finger on it, right? But as you're in your 20s, it's easier because when you're a kid, it's clear. Assuming you had a regular childhood, um, it's easier to kind of be in contact with that, seed, that authentic seed of yours. And then you start to bring on, more layers and more understanding. And there's a lot of social construct you were referring to, we're supposed to do this, we're supposed to do that. And approval, external approval becomes a thing, and fitting in becomes a thing, and being liked becomes a thing, and getting noticed and valued and seen and heard is becomes more important. So I think it's just kind of being spending time with yourself and doing the work all the time. If you're conscious of that, it's just like in connection with that, and also being very honest when there's that disconnect. You know, um, suicide rates now, in younger people are growing. So sad. College kids considering suicides or even committing suicide. Yeah, even kids in their teens. That's so sad, and that's a big red flag for our society. Hey, something's wrong here. So we pay so much attention to the external self. So here externally, I look great, but internally, I might be going through a lot of struggles. So pay attention to that, and never forget that life is a miracle. The fact that you are here, it's like 1 in a trillion chance. Like scientifically, statistically speaking, the fact that that sperm and that egg made you happen, that's like almost an impossibility. Yet here you are. So being grateful to that miracle of life, and just being aware that there's so much perspective. We are all about perspective. I'm huge on perspective, and it's looking at the same exact thing from a different lens. And if you allow yourself to understand, okay, maybe I'm just kind of super stuck in this kind of angle, and I'm suffering from anxiety or depression or fear, or I'm having these crazy thoughts, just take a step back and reach out to someone, reach out to a friend, reach out to a stranger. Go to I mean, vent with the Uber guy. Who cares, man? Just get it off your chest and allow yourself some space and do some breath work, do some breathing, go to nature. We were talking about nature. Um, Sit down in nature for a few hours. It's as powerful as it gets. Like, really, just go out and sit down, surround yourself by nature, and you'll get a better perspective. But yeah, what you were saying is a very important aspect of our human experience. And now kids in their teens or young adults in their 20s as they're kind of coming forth. I mean, I didn't grow up with a smartphone. Smartphone came into my life, later in my 30s. Um, and it's not that I'm, that old. I'm 47. But you guys, who have been, have had a smartphone and all that that entails and all that that brings with it, the way that social dynamics have changed, the way you relate to friends and society and, partners, whatever it is, that has changed. But just give yourself some space. Um, and yeah, digital detox, man. Allow yourself to, create a good habit of digital consumption because it's so addictive and it's by design supposed to be super addictive
Yeah.
that unless you have a conscious diet or discipline on how you engage with electronics, screens, etc., then it will just kind of be overpowering. It my daughters, my friends, my even my parents now. It's not a generational thing. The screen is addictive. The content is amazing, and it's all out there. So giving yourself that balance is super important.
And that's why I love Shabbat.
Yes.
I've been keeping Shabbat for almost 2 years now. And the biggest benefit I found is the digital detox. 25 hours a week. You are a person, and there's no extension to the self that's kind of trying to suck at your attention, sitting in your pocket all day. No one else, people wise and around you, can ask anything of you except for the people that are in front of you, right in front of you, your relationships, your closest friends and family. It's very special. A friend of mine actually said to me, he's not super observant, but he's tried keeping Shabbat a few times, and he said, I wonder if God created Shabbat knowing that we'd have smartphones at some point in the future. And I was like, that's a very funny point, but there's a point to it. There's a point to that, returning to ourself, returning to our essence. And Shabbat, at least for me, has been that barrier between external and internal, where there's that space for the internal in the midst of an external world.
And the fact that it's once a week.
Yeah.
If I told you it's 52 Saturdays, 52, yeah, 25-hour periods in the year, and you can choose between having it every, once a week or just doing, 52 off the bat, and
Yeah.
then, no, it's that, that kind of balance, that giving yourself that space to disconnect and not be immediately available. That's all. It's not just your approach to, consumption, but just being immediately available to anyone all the time. That's also creating a lot of anxiety. It's like, you know what? Hey, and people who know me, they know that I'm just going to be unreachable for, the next 25 hours. And it's not putting it in the drawer, it's turning it off. And there's just this feeling. I started doing it like 3 months ago. Not full Shabbat, but just turning off my phone.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's a sense of freedom that I enjoy so much.
It is. And I've found that too, especially on a college campus where Saturdays are huge for social interactions and parties and whatnot. The small group of people that I'm around, probably myself and 10 other students, give or take, on any given week that are unplugged, we created like a bubble of just like presence in our busy environment in our world. There's something very special about it.
Right. And you maybe could have chosen, be like, you know what? Yeah, I know Shabbat is Friday night, Saturday night, but that's my social moment. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll just do it from, Sunday, all Sunday. But no, you decided to keep it, sacred from Friday night to Saturday night.
And if anything, I'm more social. And
Wow.
I mean, how much can you socialize when you're distracted by everything else around you? When I am off of my phone and I'm around people who are also off of their phones, we have the most genuine interactions that I have out of my entire week. There's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to be. even if we are going somewhere else to socialize, we're just there 100%. Uh, it's very,
I love the we're just there 100%
yeah,
because the beautiful sacred present moment, right? The phone has all these quote unquote benefits. One of them is like creating a bubble. So for the younger generation, you bring out your phone and immediately if you're looking at your screen, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're looking at your screen, it means that you're doing something, right? So it creates like this invisible bubble that it just protects you. But as relationships, in-person relationships, have become less frequent because of digital social interaction. It's not that that doesn't happen, but of course it just happens less. Uh, it creates distraction, and you can't be looking at your phone and being present at the same time. I don't care what anyone says. If you're looking at your phone, you're in your screen. If you don't, if you're, I mean, so having somebody, I hate it when I have somebody in front of me and I'm talking to them and they're on their phone. It's like, you're not here. You're not fully present.
yeah.
So the fact that it's off, it allows you to be fully present for sure.
And it's harder to hide from the people around you and hide what you may be going through when you don't have those distractions of electricity, money, um, driving, transportation, like any of those things that you don't do on Shabbat. When you're just there, the people around you get a more real version of you.
100%.
I've seen this with some of my close friends who I've known for a long time, and some of them started keeping Shabbat recently, and they Friday nights and Saturdays when we're keeping Shabbat, they've opened up to me more than they have in the last 3 to 5
Wow.
years since I've known them, and it's profound. And I say to myself, people can discuss whether God exists or God doesn't exist. In Judaism, God says keep the Sabbath. We have kept the Sabbath. This beautiful thing has appeared of a friend showing raw and real emotion, like really expressing his soul. To me, that shows me that God is in the room with us. Because whether or not we want to talk about, there's this being out there that created the world, whatever. This right here, this physical interaction of real emotion, that to me is proof, and it's a beautiful thing. It really is.
I love that anecdote. I mean, this is a friend that you know for years, and when you were together without the distraction of electronics, you were able to connect at a much deeper level than you ever could.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And of course, I believe it, of course.
So another face of what you do, from what you've also told me, aside from your coaching practice, is also your teacher, and you and have recently started teaching Kabbalah, if I'm not mistaken, specifically in Spanish, which is really cool. So how did you get into that whole world of Kabbalah, and why did you decide to become a teacher of it?
Um, it chose me, pretty much. So when I moved to Colorado, I was excited to explore um, different rabbis and maybe different leaders, right? I'm big on spirituality and on my spiritual path. And in Colombia, that's more limited, right? The amount of there's just 4,000 Jews in Colombia, and here in Colorado, there's just so many options. So I was just I went synagogue hopping, and I went, just listening to different sermons from different rabbis, and seeing what's out there. And in my search, um, I met Melanie Greenwald, who leads Kabbalah Experience, and she told me about the courses that were available, and I said, sure, I'll go take one. So the first course I took was on Sefirot, the Tree of Life. It is kind of the movement of energy between an idea and the manifested, and how that kind of goes, the different um, energy parts until it comes manifested. And it was super interesting. And then the second class, I really enjoyed that. And the second class was about who am I? the transformation of self, and the masks that were constantly shuffling. And I enjoyed that too. And then she said, "Oh, we got a grant at the Kabbalah Experience to teach this in Spanish. Would you consider, teaching this in Spanish?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not a teacher." She's like, "Well, I've heard you speak, and I think you're pretty eloquent, and I think you can be a great teacher. I'll teach you the content, and I'll guide you as far as, what the concepts are, etc. And if God, give me the opportunity," I said, "Sure, I will." Now, I had to confess, I had this moment. I'm like, I had this kind of imposter syndrome kind of come up and be like, I don't know, I feel a little bit like a fraud. Because I grew up hearing that Kabbalah is just for, you have to be a rabbi, and you have to have studied over 40 years, and you have to be super ready for this kind of wisdom and knowledge. But I had this very deep meditation into this, and I came out with the following understanding, which I'm enjoying, which is um, there's Kabbalah in super deep, depth, and then there's conceptual Kabbalah, transformative Kabbalah, which is what they teach, transformative Kabbalah, which is these beautiful concepts that allow us to just navigate life better and understand life better. I'm like, you know what? If I can be part of just sharing this wisdom through my understanding and my knowledge and just putting myself out there to make people's lives maybe better, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Let's do it. So now I'm in the process of understanding and learning. I'm learning all of the content, and we're actually launching the Spanish program for the first week of May. So if there's anyone interested out there, please reach out. We're going to be putting Kabbalah in Spanish for the first course, which is called Soul, and it's a eight session course. Yeah, so I'm excited about that too.
That's great. For those listeners who may not know much about Kabbalah, Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. It's kind of the underlying, call it secrets of Judaism that aren't on the surface level. You have to kind of go beneath and extract the wisdom that we've been taught, and that has been kind of hidden in plain text. So this is probably a hard question because it's so broad, but could you give a bite-sized takeaway from some of your preferred teachings that have been helpful for you from learning Kabbalah?
The shattering of the vessels. We just covered that. The shattering of the vessels is basically the Big Bang, the version of the Big Bang. And it's okay. So if God is all, right, then why does God have any need to create creation? So we dive into understanding, okay, so it's the shattering of the vessel. So it's this understanding where infinite holds the finite, or is it the finite that holds the infinite? So, for example, you as a human being are finite, but yet you feel love, and love is infinite. So, how can you, being a finite vessel, hold something that's infinite, such as love? Or God being infinite? And how can God being infinite hold a finite creation, or how can a finite creation hold God, which is infinite? So we go and we dive into those questions, which to me are awesome. They're mind blowing.
It's very mind-blowing. It brings me back to what we mentioned about the ego and how you need the ego in a sense, because the ego represents the finite. It's the limited part of our being, and we have our soul, which is connected to the infinite. But without that part of ourselves that is finite, we wouldn't be able to exist, because otherwise we wouldn't have self-awareness. We would be absorbed into all that is. And so, with all the limitations of our self and our psyche and our ego and these really like finite things, they do create the vessel for which God or the universe or fill in the blank for your higher power can experience itself through humanness, through our bodies, through our minds. And um, what I love is that when you break it down to those terms, it's so consistent with all the other pieces of wisdom in our world. Like on a religious level, Judaism may look very different from other forms of spiritual practice, but when you break it down to that level, to the essence, to the core, it's all the same idea. It's the essence of the Shema, that Hashem is one, God is one, and that oneness is it just appears in so many different ways in our world.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Buddhism. I think Buddhism is amazing. Taoism has a lot of wisdom. I think all religions, at least when they started, had this faith based understanding of giving their people something to hold on to. And those hard questions, or the unanswerable questions, where do we come from? Where, why am I here? And that mysticism, that spirituality, since we started recording society, civilization, that has been part of the human questioning, and religions have allowed for that space to grow, and absolutely. So some people, some religions call it energy. Some they have different names for God, but at the end, to me, it's just one God, one creation.
I think also in our world, we, it's especially with religion, we started off as a society that very much um, was entirely faith based, when the origins of religion, where devotion to God was at the center of many human practices. And then we come into a world of science and of the need to analyze and find like empirical evidence for everything. And I think that that brings incredible growth as a society, as a civilization, as human beings. But when we become too analytical, we can miss the point, and that there are things out there that we may not be able to, we may not have the tools to observe yet in the modern sense. That's something that I try to remember, because especially as a university student where I'm in my psychology classes, and I'm not taught that the human psyche is and that the self is body and soul, that there's a dual experience as a human. I'm taught, well, evidence says this, and this, but it's very sterile. It's very much stripped of human spirit. So in this world, I try and draw myself back to these teachings for that reason.
Absolutely. I love it. And I'm a big fan of science. I love the brain, and I love the human body, and I love scientific understanding and explanations and research. And I think science allows us to understand so much, but uh, at least in my perspective, it's not standalone. So there's that combination of our growth and our wisdom and our knowledge that comes from science, but also that growth and wisdom and understanding that comes from our divine, from our soul, our intuition, our love, our compassion, our empathy, our connection, the bigger picture. And I think it's just, at least to me, it's obvious. And that's what we as humans juggle in our day to day, is that mix of mind, body, and soul, allowing me this human experience, which is unique, authentic. And as far as evolution, or development, or whatever is happening, we are literally on the edge of creation. It's unfolding before our eyes. It's amazing. 13 and a half billion years since the Big Bang. Amazing. Not one single second has been repeated in 13 and a half billion years. Every single second is a new second. This moment will never be the same. It will never be replicated. It's unique, authentic, and it's gone. So just that awareness, that consciousness, that celebration of the miracle of life is awesome.
Yeah, it brings me back to this idea I learned from my rabbi, is that and I'd never heard it before, surprisingly, but the universe and our world is constantly being created anew in each moment. Creation is, it's not something that happened at a single point and the world existed. That was creation. No, creation, the world is constantly being created. And so we're part of that. When we create, we are one with the creative energy that's constantly occurring. So I think it's very important to remember.
Of course. And I love frequency and I love vibration. So I'm big on frequency and vibration and the ongoing, unfolding of life as it happens. But going back to your title of your podcast, it's embracing the shadow. It's part of us. It's embracing the darkness. There cannot be light without darkness. It's part of who we are.
Yeah.
And we should embrace it and allow it, but be careful not to just kind of drown in it. We have always two choices. We can be a victim and fall into the drama and the poor me card, and this is me stuck, and this happened. Or that same situation, we can be students and be like, all right, how can I use this to understand that this hardship is an opportunity for me to grow, to expand, and to, just go through the human experience, become a better person at the end.
Amazing. Well, Stephen, thank you for coming on the show. We definitely have more to talk about. We haven't even scratched the surface of your water fast, which is something we can talk about another time for sure. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone listening was reminded of who they are, where they come from, and how to balance the external and the internal. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to have
Thank you so much, Yehuda. Enjoyed being here.